In 1832, in the quiet farmland of Franklin County, Missouri, something happened that should not have been possible. 3 brothers were said to have been born without bones or blood, a claim so grotesque that even doctors tried to erase it from the records. Yet fragments of testimony, old journals, and whispered recollections insist this story is true. And if it is, then one family's secret remains one of the darkest mysteries in American history. The settlement outside Franklin County was small, barely more than 30 families scattered across rolling farmland. It was a world of candlelight and horse-drawn wagons, where survival meant long winters, failed crops, and neighbors who knew every detail of each other's lives. Elias Turner and his wife Margaret lived on a modest farm a mile outside the town center. Elias was known for his strength and stubbornness. Margaret, quiet and pale, rarely joined church gatherings. They were not outsiders exactly, but they kept to themselves in a way that made people whisper. One of the earliest written mentions of the Turners appears in the journal of Reverend John Wilcox, dated March 12, 1832. The Turner woman is again with child. There is concern. Her last confinement ended in secrecy. The babe was not brought forth to the congregation as is customary. It was buried, or so Elias said, but no grave was seen in the churchyard. I sensed shadows where there should be light. This was unusual. In that time and place, a child's birth was both a celebration and a duty. Families presented newborns in church, baptism was a community event, and even infant deaths were mourned publicly. For the Turners to conceal a child's fate was a breach of trust. Neighbors began to talk. Some claimed they heard faint cries at night, long after the supposed burial. Others swore they had seen Margaret pacing the fields with something bundled against her chest, though no infant was ever shown. In May 1832, Margaret went into labor. The midwife, a woman named Sarah Benton, was summoned to the Turner farm. Decades later, Sarah's granddaughter would retell what her grandmother had whispered in fear. She said the child was unlike any she had seen in her 30 years of birthing babies. Soft, fragile, no bones, she said. She pressed its arm between her fingers and it gave like dough. And she swore there was no blood, not a drop, even when the cord was cut. Sarah Benton left the Turner home that night, pale and trembling. She told her husband she would never return there again. Within a week, she left the settlement entirely, moving east to stay with relatives in St. Louis. The town accepted Elias's explanation that the child had been stillborn. But those who had seen Sarah's face that night never forgot it. By late summer of 1832, the Turner farm grew quiet. Elias was seen less frequently in town. Margaret stopped attending Sunday services altogether. Some neighbors reported seeing smoke from the chimney late at night, even in the heat of August. A farmer named Jacob Lee recalled, years later in testimony to a county clerk, "We heard sounds sometimes. Not cries like a babe, not like an animal either. Wet sounds, low, like something shifting that had no shape. I told myself it was hogs rooting in the barn, but I knew it was coming from their house." His wife, Mary Lee, remembered seeing Margaret hanging linens on a line behind the house. Among the white sheets there had been something else, a piece of cloth stained dark, as though it had been soaked and wrung out. By the winter of 1833, Margaret was pregnant again. This time there was no midwife. Elias barred anyone from entering their home. Neighbors knew when the labor came because they heard Margaret's screams carried across the cold air, piercing in the stillness of night. But no one was invited to witness the child. Days passed and no announcement came. Elias simply appeared in town one morning, bought more supplies than usual, salt, cloth, nails, and returned home without a word. The Reverend noted in his journal, January 19, 1833, again, "The Turner household is cloaked in silence. The woman does not emerge. The man will not speak of the matter. This is not God's way. I fear something unnatural dwells beneath their roof." Rumors grew darker. Some said Elias had made a pact with forces best left unnamed, that Margaret was cursed, that the land itself was poisoned. Others whispered the children still lived, hidden, and that they were not like other children at all. One evening in March 1833, a hired hand named Samuel Briggs, barely 16, was sent by his father to deliver a sack of grain to the Turner farm. He returned home shaken, insisting he would never go back. According to his account, which survived in an 1840 interview, "I heard something inside their barn. It was moving, slow and heavy like wet cloth sliding. I thought maybe it was a calf stuck in the straw. But then I saw it. Something small, pale, crawling on its belly. It had no bones in it. It twisted like a sack of flour moving on its own. When it turned its head toward me, I ran. His father dismissed the story as nerves. But Samuel never worked alone again after sundown. By the summer of 1834, whispers about the Turners filled the town tavern. Men spoke in hushed tones over mugs of ale. "Did you see her last week?" one farmer asked. "Aye, thin as a reed, eyes dark as coal, like she ain't slept in years." "And Elias?" "He looks like a ghost. Keep buying more salt, more nails." "For what?" "Mark my words. There's something in that house that shouldn't be." The talk always ended the same way. Lowered voices, glances toward the door, and someone muttering, "Best not to meddle." In late 1834, Margaret fell ill, but those who saw her from a distance knew the shape of her sickness. She was with the child again. This time, no screams were heard. No midwife was summoned. No announcement came. Only silence, and yet, by December, neighbors began to hear something at night. Not the cries of an infant, but 3 distinct voices. High, wet, and inhuman, they echoed faintly across the frozen fields. One settler swore he saw 3 small shapes in the moonlight near the Turner barn. They moved slowly, dragging themselves, their bodies sagging in ways that no normal child could. In February 1835, Elias reluctantly summoned Dr. Nathaniel Clark. Clark later wrote in his private notes, discovered in 1871, "I attended the Turner household. The wife is pale, her veins dark, her body weak. She claims she has birthed 3 sons. I was not permitted to examine them fully. Yet I caught sight of one. The skin waxed pallid, limbs soft as dough. It did not cry, but it breathed. 'God help me,' it breathed." Clark left abruptly and never returned. Within months, he relocated to Illinois. By now, the settlement lived in the quiet dread of Turner Place. Children were forbidden to wander near it. Livestock sometimes went missing, found days later bloodless in the fields. Dogs would not go near the property, and yet no one confronted Elias. Fear and superstition kept them away. People told themselves it was a private sorrow, a family's tragedy. But deep down, they knew better. On the night of October 2nd, 1835, Jacob Lee and his wife awoke to sounds outside their farmhouse. Something was moving in the dirt, dragging itself just beyond the window. Jacob lit a lantern and peered out. For a moment, he saw them. 3 small figures in the field, pale and boneless, crawling together in silence. Their heads turned toward the light, and though they had no clear eyes, Jacob swore they looked straight at him. The lantern slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. By the time he dared to look again, the figures were gone. But in the distance, carried on the night wind, came the sound of 3 voices crying in unison, wet, broken cries that did not fade until morning. By 1836, the settlement near Franklin County had grown restless. The Turner farm was no longer just a subject of whispers. It was a shadow hanging over the entire community. Neighbors avoided the land. Children were warned not to stray near it. And yet strange events crept into daily life that no one could ignore. The Reverend's Journal for March 1836 reads, "I have tried to guide the people with faith, but the Turners weigh heavy on all. Their children, I hesitate to call them such, are never seen, but their presence is felt. Dogs howl at their home, cattle shy from the pasture, and at night there are sounds I cannot ascribe to nature." In the spring of 1836, small but disturbing things began to happen in town. Tools left in barns were found bent or broken, as if by strange pressure. Chickens were discovered dead, their bodies whole but drained of blood. Neighbors complained of wet footprints leading up to their porches at dawn, only to vanish in the dirt road. Mary Lee recalled years later, "It wasn't human prints, I'll tell you that. Too soft, too round, like someone pressed a sack into the earth, and there were always 3 of them. Always 3. The townsfolk tried to explain these events in the safety of daylight, whispering in corners of the general store. "You heard about Thomas's cow?" "Aye, found it laid out like it had been bled dry." "Wolf?" "No wolf leaves no mark, not a scratch." "And the Turners?" "Hush your tongue. Best not to say their name too loud." By September 1836, strange lights were reported at the Turner farm. Travelers riding the dirt road after sundown swore they saw lanterns swinging wildly through the windows. Though no one was ever seen holding them, One peddler, recorded in an 1840 county statement, claimed, "The whole house glowed like fire from within, but no smoke rose from the chimney. I heard cries, high-pitched like children, but not right. I whipped my horse hard and never looked back." As the brothers grew, the disturbances reached beyond the Turner property. Items began to vanish from neighbors. Homes, blankets, water buckets, once even a Bible. What made it worse was how some of the objects were returned days later, damp and stained with something dark. Margaret Lee, only 12 at the time, remembered waking in the night to see her missing quilt folded neatly at the foot of her bed, though her window had been locked. She swore she smelled wet earth and iron. Witness testimony, 1837. The most chilling account from this period came from a hired farmhand named William Price. In November 1837, he walked home late after working in the fields. His path took him past the Turner property. He told his employer the next morning, "I saw them, 3 of them, moving in the field. Their heads lolled side to side, like they had no bones to hold them straight. They stopped when they knew I was there. And then, I swear on my life, I heard them in my head. Voices whispering, though their mouths never opened. They said my name. They knew my name." Price quit the settlement within a week and was never seen again. Inside the Turner home, Margaret was unraveling. A surviving letter she wrote to her sister in St. Louis, dated April 1838, was discovered decades later in a family Bible. They do not sleep. They move at night, whispering to one another in ways I cannot understand. Elias says they are still our children, but God help me, I fear them. Sometimes I think they drink from me at night. I wake weak, my arms bruised, my skin pale. I cannot endure much longer. This letter was never answered. By 1838, women gathering water at the communal well began to exchange uneasy words. "Did you hear her singing last night?" "Margaret?" "No, not her, higher," 3 voices. "It was coming from Turner Place." "I heard it too." "They weren't singing, it was crying. Why would God allow this? Maybe he didn't." In October 1838, a young man named Henry Dyer was hired to help Elias with harvest. He was last seen entering the Turner barn at dusk. When neighbors asked Elias where Henry had gone, Elias replied flatly, he went home. But Henry's horse remained tied near the fence, and his belongings were still in the loft. His family searched the woods for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. The Reverend wrote, "I believe the young man met a foul end. And yet, none dare confront Elias. Fear binds us all." The disturbances grew bolder. Families reported knocking at their doors in the middle of the night, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. When it opened, no one was there. Children whispered of figures at their windows, pale shapes that slithered away when adults came to look. One mother, Sarah Coleman, testified later, "My boy swore he saw 3 of them standing in the yard. He said their heads were pressed against the glass. When I looked, there was nothing. But the window was wet, like something had breathed on it." By 1839, the community was split between those who wanted to confront the Turners and those who feared provoking something worse. Meetings were whispered in the churchyard, but no decision was ever made. Dialogue between 2 farmers recorded in later oral history. "We can't live like this forever. You want to march up to that house? To face them? No, not alone. Then we wait, or we pray." On the night of July 21st, 1839, thunder rolled over Franklin County. Lightning flashed across the fields, illuminating the Turner farmhouse. Jacob Lee, still haunted by his earlier encounter, stood at his window watching the storm. For a moment, in the white crack of lightning, he saw them. 3 figures standing in the rain outside the Turner house. They weren't children anymore. Taller now, their bodies sagged grotesquely, their heads tilted as if too heavy to hold. And though the storm drowned out all other sound, Jacob swore he heard them, 3 voices in unison, whispering through the thunder. Calling his name, the storm raged until morning. But Jacob never slept again that night. By the summer of 1840, the Turner farm was no longer just whispered about, it was actively avoided. Travelers detoured miles rather than pass its fence line, and the town's children invented cruel rhymes about the boneless boys that made adults shudder. Still, strange events could not be ignored forever. The settlement was small, and every disappearance, every mutilated animal, every unexplained light or sound left its mark on the community's fragile trust. The Reverend's Journal, July 1840. The land itself feels cursed. Those boys, or whatever they are, grow stronger. Their influence spills into every home, every field. I believe the devil has his hand on this place. God forgive us, we waited too long. That summer, 3 children vanished from a neighboring farm, the Lee family's youngest. Their parents claimed the children had gone to fetch water at dusk but never returned. Search parties scoured the woods for 2 days, finding nothing but overturned buckets near the creek. Then, on the 3rd morning, Margaret Lee screamed when she found all 3 buckets placed neatly on her porch. Each was half filled with dark, foul-smelling water. Inside the last bucket was a scrap of cloth that belonged to her daughter. The settlement erupted in fear, and suspicion, though unspoken, turned sharply toward the Turners. For the first time, the men of the settlement gathered openly in the church. Voices rose, fists slammed tables. They took them, same as they took Henry Dyer. No proof. What more proof do you need? If we go there, we may not come back. After hours of shouting, it was decided a small group would confront Elias Turner, search his property, and put an end to the unease. On August 3, 1840, 6 men rode to the Turner farmhouse: Jacob Lee, Thomas Green, Samuel Dyer, Reverend Carter, and 2 hired farmhands. They found Elias sitting on the porch, rocking slowly, his face pale and drawn. Jacob spoke first. "We've come to see the house. Too many gone missing, Elias. We need the truth." Elias looked at them with hollow eyes. Then he said quietly, "The truth is not what you want." Still, he didn't resist. He stood, opened the door, and let them inside. The Turner house smelled of damp earth and iron. The walls were bare, the windows covered. In the kitchen, bowls of water sat on every surface, some with strange sediments floating at the bottom. Reverend Carter wrote later, "It was as if the house was not for living but for sustaining. The water was not for thirst but for them. I dare not call them children. They found Margaret in the parlor, pale, thin, her eyes ringed with dark circles. She clutched a Bible so tightly her knuckles were white. When Jacob asked where the children were, she began to weep. 'They don't mean harm,' she whispered. 'They only hunger. I tried to give them what they need, but it's never enough.' 'Never enough? What do they eat?' Reverend Carter pressed. Margaret's silence was enough. As they searched the house, the men heard sounds, soft, dragging noises above them, like sacks of grain sliding across the floor. Sometimes faint whispers trickled down, 3 voices overlapping in eerie harmony. Samuel Dyer whispered, "They're up there." But when the men climbed the stairs, they found the rooms empty. Beds untouched, windows nailed shut. It was Jacob who noticed the trap door beneath a rug in the kitchen. The wood was damp around the edges, as if water seeped from below. With a lantern, the men pried it open. A wave of foul air rushed up, heavy with rot and rust. They descended slowly into the cellar. The cellar was no ordinary storage room. Its dirt floor was soaked dark, as if flooded many times. Wooden buckets lined the walls, filled with stagnant water, and in the far corner were 3 crude cots. The bedding was slick, glistening as though wet even in the lantern light. Strange stains marred the ground, dark patches that smelled of copper. Then came the sound. Not footsteps, not breathing, something in between. A wet dragging circling them in the shadows. The lantern's glow caught movement. Something slithered against the wall, too quick, too pale. Another form slipped behind a beam. Finally, the light revealed them. 3 figures, taller than before, their skin pallid and sagging as though it barely clung to their frames. Their heads tilted at impossible angles, eyes wide and glassy. They had no clear bones to hold their bodies straight, limbs bent unnaturally, joints folding inward, and yet they moved. Jacob gasped. Reverend Carter began to pray. The 3 spoke at once, without opening their mouths, hungry. The brothers lurched forward, their bodies undulating as though liquid moved inside them instead of bones. Thomas swung his lantern wildly, the flame guttering. Samuel shouted for them to retreat. One of the figures stretched an arm too far, the limb lengthening like wet rope. It brushed Samuel's shoulder, leaving a slick smear that burned his skin. The men scrambled up the ladder, slamming the trapdoor shut. Elias stood at the kitchen door, watching calmly. "They only want what's theirs," he murmured. The 6 men fled the Turner house without looking back. Not one spoke on the ride home. That night, Jacob Lee could not sleep. He heard the whispers again, Three voices inside his head. Hungry, thirsty, yours. The Reverend tried to rally the town the next day, urging them to abandon Franklin County altogether. Some families did leave. Others insisted the Turners should be destroyed, the house burned to the ground, but fear kept most from acting. The image of those wet, boneless figures haunted their minds. None dared return. Margaret's decline, weeks later. Margaret was seen wandering near the well, her gown damp, her hair matted. She clutched her Bible, but when asked if she was well, she only whispered, "They take from me every night. Soon they will take it all." On the night of October 12, 1840, flames lit the horizon. Jacob Lee awoke to shouts. Someone had set fire to the Turner farmhouse. Neighbors rushed to the scene, but the house did not burn as it should. The flames sputtered, hissed, and died, as if drowned from within. Through the smoke, three figures stood in the field, watching silently as the house smoldered. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and then they began walking toward the town. The fire was supposed to end it. Yet on that October night in 1840, when the Turner farmhouse refused to burn, the settlement realized something chilling. The horror inside was no longer bound to one place. Three figures walked away from the smoldering ruins, three brothers born without bones or blood, heading toward the town that had whispered about them for years. October 13th, 1840, by sunrise, the Turner farm stood silent. The house was blackened but not destroyed, its charred timbers strangely wet to the touch. No one dared enter. Instead, attention turned to Franklin's main road. Heavy, uneven tracks marred the dirt, marks that looked neither human nor animal. Dragging imprints like sacks of grain pulled through mud led straight toward the heart of the town. Thomas Green, the blacksmith, was the first to see them that morning. He swore he had just opened his shop when he noticed movement across the square. They came slowly, he said later, not walking right, like their bodies didn't know how to stand. But their faces, they were all three. He claimed his forge fire dimmed when they passed. His horses screamed until their throats were raw. By the time others arrived, the brothers were gone, leaving only damp footprints on the wooden planks outside the smithy. Rumors spread fast. Some said the brothers had entered homes at night, standing silently by bedsides before vanishing. Others swore their wells turned foul overnight, the water thick and copper-tasting. Margaret Lee, still grieving her missing children, locked her doors and nailed every window shut. "They're not boys anymore," she told neighbors. "They're something else." On October 15th, the settlement gathered again at the small white church. Reverend Carter's voice trembled as he addressed them. "These are not children of man. They are not of flesh as we know it. We must decide, do we fight or do we flee?" Samuel Dyer slammed his fist. "You'd have us abandon our homes, our land, for what? For three devils that should have been drowned years ago." But Jacob Lee, hollow-eyed, whispered, "Fight them, and you'll see how wrong you are." That night, a group of armed men volunteered to keep watch, Samuel Dyer among them. They stationed themselves near the well, the heart of the settlement. Lanterns burned, rifles loaded. At midnight, the air grew damp, heavy. Mist curled between the houses, though the night was clear, and then came the sound. Wet dragging, soft but steady, circling the square. The watchmen saw them, three figures emerging from the mist. Taller than before, their pale skin glistened as though freshly soaked. Their limbs bent unnaturally with each step. One man raised his rifle and fired. The shot tore through a figure's chest. But instead of falling, the brother only convulsed, his body rippling like disturbed water. Then he straightened again. The wound closed before their eyes. Samuel whispered, "Dear God." The brothers spoke together, not aloud. But inside every man's head, thirsty, yours. Lanterns shattered, plunging the square into near darkness. The men scattered, screaming. By morning, only 3 of the watchmen returned alive. Samuel was not among them. The next day, the Dyer family found their barn soaked through, every bale of hay dripping as if left in rain. Samuel's boots were discovered inside, filled with foul water. His body was never recovered. That was when panic truly took hold. Families packed wagons. By the end of the week, nearly half the settlement had fled westward, leaving behind homes they'd built with their own hands. But not everyone could leave. One evening, Margaret Turner herself stumbled into town, barefoot, drenched to the bone. Her hair hung in dripping ropes, her Bible clutched to her chest. "They're not my sons anymore," she rasped. "They never were. The water gave them to me, and the water will take you too." When pressed for answers, she began to scream, words no one understood, a language guttural and bubbling. Her body shook violently, and before anyone could stop her, she collapsed. Her lips parted one final time, whispering, "They're coming home." She died that night. Her skin remained damp for hours after her last breath, November 12, 1840. As winter set in, disappearances mounted. First livestock, then people. Children vanished from locked rooms. A merchant's wife was found drowned in her own kitchen, though not a drop of water was on the floor. The town became a ghost of itself. Doors barred, curtains drawn. Fires never left unattended. Still, the dragging sounds persisted. A group of 12 families tried to flee in a wagon train, leaving under cover of dawn. But by nightfall, only 6 wagons reached the river crossing. The others were found days later, abandoned, wheels rotted as if soaked through, belongings scattered. No people, no bodies, just damp earth. Reverend Carter recorded his final sermon in his journal. "We have no weapons for them. Fire fails, steel fails. Prayer brings no comfort. I fear this is not punishment from God, but something older, deeper, from the water beneath our land. If we do not leave, we will be erased." On November 14, 1840, the few remaining families awoke to silence. No birds, no livestock, no sound at all. The well at the town square bubbled violently, water spilling over its stones, though no rain had fallen. From that black water, 3 pale hands began to rise. The brothers were no longer walking. They were climbing. By mid-November of 1840, Franklin was no longer a town. It was a graveyard of houses, each one locked, each one waiting. Families that could leave were gone. Those who remained stayed only because they had no choice. But when the well at the square began to churn and boil without rain, they knew running would no longer save them. The horror was not just inside the Turner house, it was in the water beneath their feet. On the night of November 14th, 3 figures emerged from the well. Witnesses described them as taller than men, but shaped wrong. Their limbs stretched too far, their torsos sagged, their skin pale and slick. They did not stumble now. They stood straight, as if they had learned how to carry themselves. Their faces still bore echoes of children, but their eyes, black, endless, inhuman, and when they opened their mouths, water poured out. "Hungry. Yours." Reverend Carter rang the church bell, summoning what few souls remained. They gathered inside the wooden chapel, doors barred, candles trembling. "This is our test," he told them. "We cannot flee. We cannot fight with weapons. But there is truth we have not yet uncovered. We must understand before it consumes us." It was then that an old settler, Elias Morton, spoke. He had lived on the land long before the Turners arrived. His voice cracked as he revealed what he knew. "The land was never ours," Elias said. "Before the county, before the church, this place belonged to the river tribes. They warned us not to dig wells here. They said the water runs deep with spirits, older than any of us. When Elias Turner built his house, he dug where he shouldn't have. The ground bled black water. His wife birthed those boys soon after. They were never human. They were the water's children." The chapel fell silent. Someone whispered, "So they were cursed from the start." But Elias shook his head. "Not cursed, claimed." The church doors rattled. A wet thudding sound echoed through the walls. The candles flickered as though smothered by unseen breath. From outside came the dragging, the overlapping voices. "Hungry, thirsty, yours." The boards of the church floor began to darken, damp spreading under the pews. Among Margaret's belongings, left behind when she died, the Reverend found her Bible, pages warped, stained with water. In the margins she had scrawled desperate notes. "They do not bleed. They flow. Fire cannot hold them. They are older than flame. They feed on what we cannot see, our breath, our bones, our blood. If they return to the source, the land may rest." The Reverend clung to that final line. "The source," he whispered. "The well." It was decided. They would lure the brothers back to the well and seal it, burying them beneath stone and earth. It was the only chance. Jacob Lee, hollow from grief, volunteered. "They took my children. They took Samuel. Let them take me too, if it brings them home." That night, Jacob stood in the square, lantern in hand, his voice breaking as he called into the darkness. "You want me. I'm yours. Come take me." The mist thickened. From every alley, every street, the sound of dragging approached. The brothers appeared, swaying, their eyes locked on him. Jacob did not run. He backed slowly toward the well. The townsfolk watched from the church steps as the brothers encircled. "Jacob." Their voices seeped into every mind. "Yours, ours, home." Jacob dropped the lantern into the well. Flames hissed as oil caught, illuminating the black water. For a moment, the brothers hesitated. Their bodies shivered, rippling like liquid. The Reverend and the men pushed forward, carrying heavy stones, iron scraps, anything to collapse the well once the brothers were inside. But Elias Turner appeared then, the father, pale and ragged, as if he had been living in the woods. "Stop," he screamed. "They are mine." "You cannot take them from me again." He rushed to the brothers, arms outstretched, and to the horror of all watching, the brothers embraced him. Their bodies folded around his, absorbing him into their pale mass. His scream echoed, then cut off. When they straightened again, Elias was gone. Jacob seized the moment. With a final cry, "For my children," he leapt into the well. The brothers shrieked, a sound like rushing floodwaters. Their forms rippled violently, drawn toward the source. The Reverend and the townsfolk acted, heaving stones, timber, and iron into the well. The ground shook as the water churned. For hours they worked until the opening was sealed, buried beneath tons of earth. The voices faded. The mist lifted. When dawn came, the square was quiet. But the survivors knew the cost. Jacob Lee was gone. Elias Turner was gone. And yet for the first time in months the air was clear. The wells no longer stank. The dragging sounds ceased. The Reverend wrote in his journal, "We buried them where they began. But I fear burial is not the same as death." On December 6, 1840, a traveler passing through Franklin stopped at the abandoned square. Curious, he scraped away some loose earth at the old well site. He swore he felt dampness seep through the soil. When he pressed his ear to the ground, he heard 3 voices whispering in unison. Not enough. Never enough. The town of Franklin did not die in one night. It withered slowly, like a candle left to burn itself out. But for those who survived the year of the Turner brothers, life was never whole again. And though the well was buried in 1840, the story did not stay buried with it. December 1840. After Jacob Lee's sacrifice and the sealing of the well, Franklin fell into silence. Families who remained moved closer together, refusing to let anyone walk alone. Doors were never left open. Still, the survivors whispered about what they had seen. Some swore the earth near the well steamed on cold nights. Others claimed their dreams were filled with voices, wet and overlapping, whispering, "Hungry, thirsty, yours." By spring, most families abandoned Franklin entirely. The town was left to rot. Reverend Carter left Missouri in 1842, relocating to Illinois. His sermons there grew darker, filled with warnings of water, temptation, and children born wrong. Parishioners thought him mad. His journal was discovered decades later, locked in a chest. The Lee family, broken by the loss of their children and Jacob's sacrifice, scattered. Margaret Lee was said to never recover. She wandered roadsides, asking strangers if they had seen her babies. She died in a poorhouse in 1847. A handful of others carried the memory but spoke little. Why would anyone invent something like this? One survivor muttered years later, "You don't invent nightmares that ruin your life." In 1851, new settlers moved into the abandoned county. They found homes still standing, though most refused to use the old wells. Yet, children who drank from the nearby creek sometimes fell ill, strange fevers, unexplained seizures. A doctor wrote in his notes, "The water tastes metallic, though clear to the eye." The land carried memory, even when the people tried to forget. By the late 19th century, Franklin had become a ghost story told by travelers. Campfires lit the tale. 3 boys born without bones or blood, a town that drowned from the inside, a well where whispers could still be heard if you pressed your ear to the ground. Children dared one another to visit the ruins. Few ever did. Those who claimed to hear the whispers never forgot them. County workers widening a road near the old square struck damp earth. One laborer swore water seeped out, though no pipe or spring was nearby. 2 days later, he vanished. His boots were found by the creek, filled with stagnant water. Locals muttered, "The brothers don't rest." In the 1920s, a historian named Dr. Howard Fields collected journals and testimonies about Franklin. He visited the site, writing, "The land is sodden, even in drought. At night the soil seems to breathe. I cannot shake the feeling of being watched." His papers were dismissed as folklore. But in his private notes, never published, he confessed he heard voices near the buried well. 3 of them whispering, "They knew my name." He abandoned his research. In 1938, an elderly woman named Ruth Carter, granddaughter of the Reverend, was interviewed by a local newspaper. She spoke carefully as though weighing every word. "My grandfather tried to warn people. He said evil doesn't die, it waits. He said water remembers." When asked if she believed the brothers were real, she answered only, "Why else does no one live there still?" Today, Franklin exists only as scattered ruins, swallowed by forest. Hikers who stray too far from marked trails sometimes report strange things. The sound of dragging in the underbrush, footprints in mud where no one walked, whispers near streams, always in threes. One camper claimed his child woke up screaming, saying, "The wet boys were standing by my bed." In 2019, a team of amateur explorers filmed themselves near what they believed was the site of Franklin's old well. The footage, shaky, grainy, shows them digging lightly at the earth. Minutes in, one pauses. "Do you hear that?" The others lean closer. A faint sound rises, picked up by the microphone. 3 voices overlapping, faint but unmistakable. Not enough. Never enough, the video cuts abruptly. None of the explorers uploaded again. The story of the Turner brothers has lingered for nearly 2 centuries. A family born of cursed water. A town erased not by fire or war, but by thirst. And if you visit the forests of Missouri, some say you can still hear them. 3 voices in the night, rising from damp soil, waiting. Because some horrors do not die, they only wait to be thirsty again. The end.